So we're going to be starting out this morning with a Bible story. And, do you realize we haven't done a Bible sermon in over a month, which I think is the longest I've ever gone. But here we are back in it, back in the Bible, and in the New Testament, no less. So in this story, Jesus and his bros are hanging out, and Jesus is philosophizing and opining and commenting on the world around them, and he points out the people who are giving their gifts to the treasury, their contributions to the temple, and he notices that some people are giving quite a lot. And then there's this one woman, a very poor widow, who's giving just a little bit, just 2 copper coins. But Jesus posits that her gift is worth more than everybody else's, because everybody else is giving out of their abundance, whereas this widow is giving out of the almost nothing that she has. It's kind of interesting that the copper coin that she gives, they're referred to as mites. The coin is, they call it a widow's mite, which is not the historical name of the coin that a woman in ancient Israel would have had. Mite was the name of a European coin that the readers of the King James Bible would have been more familiar with. So it's a widow's mite is not a biblical thing. I find these things interesting. The joke that my colleagues love to make is that this story is in the Bible mostly so that preachers have something to talk about on a pledge Sunday, right? And we get to talk about how, you give what you can, and no gift is too small and all of that. And that's fine. That's not really what the story means. If you look at the context around it, Jesus is making more of a larger statement about the socioeconomic situation of the religious institutions of his time. But the traditional interpretation of the story does its job, and that job is not unimportant. But I'm interested in looking at this story from a different perspective. I'm wondering what happens if, instead of talking about this widow in the abstract, what happens if we try to look at the story from her perspective? What happens if this woman isn't just a number or a contribution or an idea, but is a person with a motivation and a story? Because this widow's situation in life is not a purely economic situation, right? We know by virtue of what she is called. She's called the widow. She is in this long line of women in the Bible who don't get to have first names. She's called the widow, so we know that she has suffered a loss, right? She is a person who is very familiar with grief and heartache. She is bereft not only economically, but she is also somebody who knows what it is to struggle emotionally and spiritually as well. I imagine her walking up to give her little gift, and she is exhausted. She's heartbroken. She's barely putting one foot in front of the other. And this is more interesting to me than how much she gives. It's just the fact that she gives it all. We've all had different experiences around money in our lives, right? So the widow's financial situation, that may or may not be one that we can relate to, but all of us have felt the way that she is feeling, right? We have all felt exhausted and heartbroken. We've all felt like there is nothing left for us. Jesus says she's given more than the rest of them. And I wonder if perhaps he isn't only talking about money. I wonder if he means spiritually and emotionally as well. This woman has given so much. She's worked so hard that to her, giving anything at all in any form is a truly momentous thing. And that's something that I think a lot of us can relate to right now, right? I mean, we are in the middle of a global pandemic, and there is renewed energy around the fight for justice for Black people and people of color who have been oppressed by police brutality and by systematic racism, and the response to that justice work has been oppressive in and of itself. The consequences of climate change are causing devastation all over the world. This is coming especially in this country in the forms of hurricanes and wildfires on the West Coast, right where I grew up. And the President of the United States is unabashedly lying and spewing hate every single day. And all of this is creating a massive global crisis that has been punishing to all of our mental and emotional well-being. In this moment, it's almost hard not to feel like that widow, to feel so exhausted, so bereft, like you have so little left to give. It's common to say that times like these bring out the best in some people and bring out the worst in other people, right? We think about bringing out the best in people. We think about, first responders and essential workers and basically everybody who got to be featured on Some Good News with John Krasinski. And we think about it bringing out the worst in people. We think about, people refusing to wear masks, people who are denying that COVID-19 is real, people who are spreading conspiracy theories. Like my wife met this woman at the dog park who was pretty sure that the cafeteria workers of Shelby County schools are going to sneak off and sell and profit from all of the school lunches that don't get picked up this year, which, three things about that. One, that is a horrible, ignorant thing to say. Two, that is positively ridiculous, right? Like, sell them to who? And for what, right? You just picture somebody, in dark glasses going, hey, you want to buy some applesauce cups? And three, if anybody is now in the position where buying or selling contraband cafeteria food is the thing that makes the most sense for them in their life right now, then just let them do it. Right? And thank God that you are not in that position. And maybe reflect a little bit about how completely and utterly our society has failed that person. But I wonder in general about this narrative that this situation brings out the best or the worst in people, right? Because I think either way that's problematically reductive. Because the truth is that this situation brings out the best and the worst in each of us, depending on the situation and, often just depending on the day, depending on the moment. I think all of us, when all is said and done, can say that this brought out the best and the worst in us, and we, generally speaking, landed somewhere in the middle, right? And we probably found ourselves on both extremes at some point. As human beings, we all have the capacity to do a huge amount of good, and we all have the capacity to cause a huge amount of harm. So at all times, but especially in a moment like this one, we cannot demand of ourselves that we be perfect all the time, nor can we just give ourselves over to being our worst selves and just say, forget it. The best way forward, I think, is to just do what we can with what we've got. In the story, we see this widow responding to the moment that she is in, and we see an example of her giving. We see an example of her letting her best self be front and center, and surely there have been moments when she has struggled. There have been moments when she has lashed out. There have been moments when the tragedy of her situation has just become too much for her, and she has said and done things that she is not proud of. But she is honored in this story because right now she's doing what she can when she can. And that is the real task of religious communities in this crisis. I don't like the idea of religious communities being places where we have to do it all right, or even where we have to do it all well. I'm also not interested in a place where we are all dirty, horrible sinners who can only be redeemed by forces that are out of our control. I am much more interested in the idea of religious communities as places where we do our best, where all of us traumatized, grieving, short-tempered people try to do and to give as best as we can and do our best to accept each other even in the midst of our limitations and our triumphs. And that's why we do this. That's why we have churches, and that is why we give and why we support those churches. When we are all so exhausted in all of the ways that we are right now, when we are all stumbling around feeling like we barely have 2 copper coins, 2 mites of emotional energy to give, our congregations tell us that we are capable of better than we currently are, and that our world is capable of better than it currently is. Right? If we do this right, then this community, the people of this community, the minister of this community, all of us, the message should not be to say that everything is terrible, nor should the message be that everything is just fine, nor should the message be that you are terrible or that you are perfect. The message of the church should be that the worst parts of who we are, the worst things that we have ever done, do not define us as people. And that the worst parts of the world do not mean that the world is a bad place. This is an era when our worlds are all getting smaller, right? We are, many of us, spending a lot of time stuck in our houses, still mostly only interacting with people who we choose to interact with, mostly seeing the world only through screens and seeing things on those screens that we've chosen to put on those screens. So the role of churches in this time is to try and expand our world as much as possible when so many crucial parts of our lives are getting more difficult, right? Like connection and communication and staying occupied. Our work as a church community is to make them easier. And when so many toxic habits are becoming all too easy, right, like being judgmental and making unfair assumptions and general malaise, then it is the role of the church to try and push those things a little further out of our reach. I gotta tell you, this has been a rough week for me. Right, I feel like I've spent this whole pandemic trying really, really hard to be calm and assured and professional and pastoral. And like this was the week when I hit my wall, and which, I mean, I made it 6.5 months. I feel like that's not bad. But this week I was talking with Gigi Wishmeyer, the chair of our board at Church the River. We were just, going over some basic administrative stuff, and I just kind of stopped the conversation halfway and I said, look, you don't need to take care of me or fix my problems because I am your minister and that is not your role in my life. But just like so that you have the information, I am trying to shepherd this church and get ready to be a parent while the world is both literally and figuratively burning. And this week, it's been catching up to me, and I'm having a hard time. Like, I feel like I barely have 2 copper mites to rub together of emotional or spiritual energy. And she said, well, of course. And she was so understanding and so kind. And I felt so liberated to know that my whole difficult, hurting self was a welcome presence. So then I got really into it, right? And I started telling everybody. I told Lisa and Chris about it. I told the young man at the Starbucks drive-thru about it. This is a crazy idea, but I even talked to my wife about it, and which was, that was really great. I was like, look, I'm having a hard time. And Sandra said, yes, you clearly are. I'm glad that we're finally having this conversation. And what I love about this church What I love about all churches that are doing their work, but particularly this one, is that even as the minister, this is a church where I can bring my whole entire self. This is a church where all of who we all are, in our best moments and in our worst moments, is welcome. The thing that's always struck me about the story of the widow's mite, the thing that I can never get past is the question of why give at all? Right, this woman only has 2 coppers. Jesus says that's the money that she has to buy food. And look, if you are in a place where you are seriously choosing between supporting the Church of the River and buying food, by all means buy the food. We will even help you buy the food. But my theory about this woman is that she is choosing to give even in her circumstances because she wants to. She's giving because the religious institution that she is giving to has been there for her and has loved her in all of her bitterness, in all of her heartbreak, in all of her good and bad behavior. And giving to that place, taking a part of herself and leaving it in that place, is something that she believes in, so she does it. When we all look around us and so many things going on in our world and in our lives just hurt so badly, and it feels like there's nothing that we can do. And sometimes there really isn't a whole lot that we can do except vote. You should totally vote November 3rd. When we ourselves are so utterly fried that even if something could be done, we may not be able to do it, what can we do? The answer is that we do what people like us have always done. We do what we can, when we can. We love and care for the people around us who are doing what they can. We give what and how we can, and we carry each other through. Amen.